record on this computer. So thanks for this time on the agenda, Dean Wolling. This is part of a larger project that I have been working on for well over a year. There have been other partners along the way with this, not only Synod staff and Synod Council, but Pastor Hannah Benedict, who is at St. Mark's here in Baldwinsville, Pastor Jeremiah Smith, who is at Parkside in Buffalo, Todd Eames, who, when he started, was just a member of Christ the King in Vestal and a lay preacher down on the Southern Tier. We are pretty lucky that he now serves also as our Synod treasurer. He can do fabulous air math in moments, as well as one of the most mission-minded people I've ever met. So we're pretty lucky as a Synod. And Pamela Ho, Pastor Pamela Ho, who is the mission developer at Hope in North Greenbush and Troy. So collectively, we have put this presentation together, and it's part of a project to figure out not only how are we spending our time, your Synod leaders, how are we spending our time, as well as starting to get into what are the values that we hold dear as a whole Synod, not just the Synod staff, not just the Synod Council, but what are those values that we hold dear? Because we want to be shifting how we operate so that instead of just taking the budget from last year, seeing what we can cut and seeing what we can figure out to create a balanced budget for the next year. Instead, we want to be creating a budget that is mission-centered and mission-focused, that takes into account what our priorities are and our values are as a Synod every single year. So it will be helping to not only create the budget that you all, or the mission plan that you all vote on at Synod Assembly, but also help the Synod leadership set priorities and the ways in which we operate as your leaders. So this is an introduction to a longer conversation that we're having in the month of November. Additionally, we believe that this will also help in the discernment process of electing our next bishop, because it will help us as people who vote to be discerning who has those gifts and skills, who is the one that God might be calling to serve us as bishop. And it will also help those who are nominated to discern, are they the ones that feel called to help lead these priorities and lead this direction that we as the Synod have put forth? And I'll also share with you that as of right now, Bishop Machholz has not discerned whether or not he will stand for election again. That was a question I got in another conference, but he is in discernment about that. And I suspect that when he gets back from vacation next week, or not next week, the week after, that he will be sharing that more publicly. So that's kind of where all of this came from. And now to share with you what we're going to do today. So I'm going to share my screen here. So, I did all of that without ever having shared my screen. And shared all of that already. So some of the rules of engagement, particularly when we go to breakout rooms, I want you to know that we've got some rules of engagement. We are not looking to fix anything today. We are not looking to say, this is broken and we must fix it right now, but instead to notice. And so I would invite you all to turn to wonder. When you notice those things that you might want to shift, or questions that you have, to turn to wonder with them, right? And we're always going to have this both and thinking, like good Lutherans that we are. It's never going to be an all or nothing moment, but instead this both and. I invite you, as you feel comfortable, it would be really helpful to be honest. Most importantly, to be honest with yourself and the questions that are being asked of you as you think and discern, but also for us to be honest with one another. And finally, to suspend judgment. The fancy word for that is equanimity. when having a conversation and thinking about things, right? Everything gets to be on the table with no judgment. Every idea gets to be looked at without judgment or an automatic toss away. So these are our rules for engagement in our conversations. And I hope that we can all live by them as we move forward. So I'm not sure, and right now that I'm sharing my screen, I can only see a handful of you on the screen. But for those of you who haven't seen this before, congregations have life cycles. And it looks a little bit like a bell curve for those of you who are math folk. And every congregation has a lifespan. Does anyone want to take a guess? You can just unmute and shout out. What do you think is the lifespan of a typical congregation, the average lifespan?
95 years.
95. All right, 95 years. Anyone else want to take a stab? So Pastor Marie, 95 years is pretty close. In our synod, it's probably a lot closer to the truth. But when we look across the whole church, it's actually about 75 to 80 years, which is the average lifespan of human beings. Right? So there's a time to born. That's why Ecclesiastes is there. There's a time to be born and a time to die. And every congregation has that lifespan. Congregations who have lived beyond that, and I know we've got lots of them in the Upstate New York Synod and really in the Northeast, lots of congregations who are older. It's because every 50 to 60 years, they've taken time to really reinvent themselves, to really look around their community, to look about who are members of their congregation and set a new direction for the next bit of time. That's how they've been able to do that. So it's almost like starting a whole new life. Or as my friend Danielle says, she's a DEM in the North Carolina Synod, they catch the new swerve, right? So they get up here and then they start a whole new life cycle. But when we look at this, when we look at a particular life cycle, we can kind of divide it out into quadrants. And that first quadrant, right, when congregations are first starting out, when they're first growing, they've got a lot of vitality, a lot of excitement about Jesus, a lot of excitement about starting a new community, but they're not very financially stable or sustainable. Again, my friend Danielle, she calls this the honeymoon phase of life, right? When you're just first starting out in a marriage and you might just have 2 quarters to rub together, and that's about it. So these are those brand new congregations, and we've got many of them in our synod. And then the next phase, right, is a higher vitality, higher or increasing sustainability, right? At some point, those brand new congregations, they pass this kind of line of demarcation, so to speak, and they start to be able to live on their own. They don't need those grants and that financial support from the churchwide organization and the synod and all of you who have served as mission founders in other places. Can you not hear me? Oh, okay. Thanks. And we used to say, and when I say we used to say that crossing this line right here, you needed to have 120 people in worship, right? And this 120 people, that meant that you could afford a full-time pastor, all of the benefits, all your building, and all of the ministry that's happening in your community. It is, when we look at our synod, we have 160 congregations in the Upstate New York Synod. What do you think the average worship attendance is in our synod? Again, feel free to guess.
52.
52. Oh my gosh. Dean Rolling, you are like almost right there. The average worship attendance in our synod is 59. 59, right? And we know whenever we're looking at a range, there's always some outliers that either pull the number up or pull the number down, right? Students hate those people who kill the curve and you don't get those extra bonus points. So when we think more particularly, there are about 80 congregations in our synod. So that's about half that have 50 people or less in worship every week. And there are 135 congregations in our synod that have about 100 people or less in worship every week. You can see that line of demarcation of saying 120 people in worship every week is no longer the way that we can think about sustainability. There's lots of things about sustainability. One, regular worship attendance is no longer every week. It's usually about once a month, sometimes even longer than that. And people will say, yeah, I regularly attend church. And so you might have 50, 60, 70 people in worship every week, but you might have 120 active people in your congregation. In addition, that model of one pastor, one church is a model that's starting to go away and is no longer sustainable, not only in the ELCA, but when we think about church generally. More and more congregations are in partnership and having to discern what is a healthy partnership. So with a lot of congregations, when I talk to them about sustainability, I'm not talking about how do you get 120 people in worship so that you can afford your full-time pastor, but what's the model that's right for you? Because it's all contextual. For some congregations, it might be part of a multi-point parish, like the Tri-County Lutheran Church out on in the Hudson Mohawk Conference. It's an 8-point parish, but they've got 2 pastors and an intern that help to make that parish function. And that's their sustainability model. In other places, like at Atonement, there's other ministries that happen in the building that also help to financially support the sustainability of the congregation. So there's lots of different ways to think about that. So I digress. I went down a little bit of a rabbit hole with you, but I think that there's something there, right, for us to just be thinking about in our reality. Now, every congregation, no matter what happens, they're going to get to the top. They're going to hit this plateau. And once you get to the top, what's going to happen? Right? You're going to roll. You're going to start rolling, right? And start heading down the slope. Now, when we get to this point right here where this X is, right? That's the point where congregations need to start having conversations. When they get to this quadrant here, they need to start being honest with one another. They can't ignore the elephant in the room. Because what do you think happens once you start to slide down here around your vitality and sustainability?
Attendance decreases. People get discouraged.
Yeah. Pastor,
well, work is being done by just a fewer and fewer people all the time.
Yeah. Fewer people, right? So vitality starts to go down. And if vitality starts to go down, what do you think goes down with that?
Financial support.
Financial support, right? Because people are no longer excited. So, right? So those are things that start to happen. So when congregations get to this point, what we usually talk about then is, okay, let's have a conversation. Let's look around honestly about what's happening in our congregation and our community, and what can we do to set direction for the next bit of time. But honestly, when a lot of congregations get to this point, they actually think that they're way down here. That as soon as they started to slide down that hill, they're so afraid that they're way down here that they don't have the conversations. They're not honest about where they are, right? Which means that the more you don't have those conversations, the farther you actually start to slide down the hill. So when congregations are at this point, we encourage them, right, to have a conversation, what we call, right, to swing over to the other side. We call that redefinition. Gone are the days when we can create 20-year strategies and plans. When I was on internship over 10 years ago, we had a plan that was called Vision 2020. And that was already put together before I ever arrived on internship. Everything about that congregation that I was at on internship is different. All of their pastors are different. All of their staff is different. Their building is different because they just finished a building plan. There is no way that the plan that they put in place over 10 years ago for Vision 2020 is relevant today. So the real question is that instead of trying to think so far out, let's think about the next 3 to 5 years. Let's think about the next 2 years. What are the values that we have? What's going on in our community? And how can we match those two things, right? I'm so excited for Atonement because Atonement said our priorities are caring for our neighborhood. We're looking around our neighborhood right now, and we see that there are teenagers and folks that are younger that are really trying to do school in unrealistic ways. And so they've created the Homework Lounge to have a space for teenagers. Now, is that going to bring a whole lot of money into the congregation? No, because teenagers don't have that money, and their service area, right, their neighborhood doesn't have a whole lot of money. But that doesn't mean that they didn't redefine themselves and start to think about what can we do differently to meet where we are. All right, so those are the kinds of things that we encourage congregations to do at this point. That's part of the work that I do, right? That's part of why there is a DEM. But if you don't have those conversations here, then you slide down a little bit more, and then maybe you have those conversations. And at that point, swinging back over to the high vitality, high sustainability side, what do you notice, right? That instead of a little curve, there's a bigger curve, a bigger swerve, as my friend Danielle says. This is what we've traditionally called redevelopment ministry in the ELCA. And that kind of, and so when we're thinking about congregational development, this takes a whole lot of work, a whole lot of energy, and you still have to have the people and the finances to be able to do that work of redevelopment. And so we still, while we don't necessarily use that program in the ELCA anymore, there are still congregations that are taking seriously what can we do to really rethink who we are and reclaim that energy and excitement for ministry in our congregation and in our neighborhood. Now, I've been asked questions by folks. Can we go backwards, right? Like, why do we have to go all the way over here to the other side? Why can't we just go back up to the top and make that the swerve? As a kid, one of the greatest joys of my life was to go backwards up a slide or try to get to the top of an escalator the wrong way. There was just something so thrilling about having defied gravity and defied the laws of nature. And so you could do that, but it's not just a kid trying to go backwards up a slide. Instead, it's you and you're holding the hands of 50 other people going backwards. And that is a whole lot harder to do than doing the hard work of what's called redevelopment. So that's kind of the third quadrant. When we get down to here, right, when we're now all the way down here, this kind of stuff, this is something that only the Holy Spirit can do, because this is having a hard look at a congregation and saying everything about who we are right now, we need to shake it off. We need to shake it off and start fresh. And so these are those congregations that close and give life to new congregations. Some of the same people might be there, but they acknowledge that everything about who they are before, right? They're tossing that on the table because what they've done before wasn't working. So that's what we call rebirth, right? And so when we think about all of this, right? Like, and then you can get all the way to, you can get all the way down to the bottom, right? When we get to this rebirth point, you could do that, or you could make a hard choice that First English did. When they were at this point here, they tried to do redevelopment. They tried really hard, but the truth of the matter is that they were a little bit farther down on that curve than right here. And some of the context of where they were was a little bit different. And so what they, instead of doing rebirth, what they chose to do was to take that bold step to close, because they knew that if they stayed in the building where they were, it wasn't sustainable. There was so much work that had to be done in the building, and so much energy that needed to be put into that they knew that that was not where they wanted to spend their energy, because they wanted to be faithful. They wanted to serve their neighbors. They wanted to care for the community that they'd been caring for so many years. And so they made the hard choice to close, and to then be able to give birth and legacy to other places. And so when they closed, they gave money out to all sorts of people, both in Syracuse and beyond, because they left a legacy to give birth to other ministry that is happening in Syracuse and beyond. So that's kind of a brief overview of the congregational life cycle. So any questions about that before I send you to some breakout rooms? All right. I'm not seeing any hands raised, and I'm going to send this whole presentation to Dean Wolling when we're done, so that she can share it with everybody. I highly encourage you to take that congregational life cycle, take it to your next council meeting, take it to the next opportunity you have to have conversation, and have some conversation about where your own congregation is and what's going on in your congregation. But for right now, I'm going to send you out into breakout rooms. And in those breakout rooms, this is what I want you to talk about. You're going to be there for about 5 minutes or so. And I want you to share with one another, what are you and your congregation doing right now that is vital to your community, to your neighborhood, and within the congregation? Because I know your congregations, and there are so many exciting things that are happening in the congregations in the Central Crossroads Conference, and they're different for every one of you. So I want you to go to breakout rooms and talk about what's exciting and what's giving you life and energy, and then I'll bring you all back. So you're going to be sent into random breakout rooms. So you're not going to, let's see. So you're not going to have, you might not be with people that you are in a congregation with. So I'll see you all back in 5 minutes. If you haven't done breakout rooms before, you're going to get a little box on your screen that says, would you like to join breakout room number, whatever that number is. So you'll go there. You won't be recorded in the breakout room. So for those of you that turned your screens off, your video off, you can turn that back on to have conversation. And I'll see you all in about 5 minutes. So we are all back together now. I hope you had some great conversation. So what are some of the things that you heard or that you shared? What's happening that's super exciting in your congregation? What's vital in giving life? Go ahead, Greg.
We did talk about feeding people, both Trinity Herkimer and St. Stephen, and in combination with Lois and St. Paul's, have a program to feed hungry either children or adults. And we think that that's something that's important and reaches outside our four walls.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for sharing, and thanks to all of your congregations that are doing that.
I would just add to that, piggyback off what Greg said. You know, I learned more about the backpack program from Greg and got reminded that a small group of people can impact a lot of individuals. You know, his congregation just supporting a project that sends 500 meals out into the community is really very impressive.
Yeah, I think it was Margaret Mead who said, never underestimate the power of a small group of people to change the world, because that's the only thing that ever has.
Lois, you're incredibly important to that program, so you can add more color than I can.
Who else? So what else? So thanks for sharing. So anyone else want to share what they heard or what their own congregation is doing?
The thing I heard most clearly was that everybody talked about worship, and that sounds really just standard, but the ability to regather for those who are reopening, those who are able to adapt in whatever way they need to adapt in order that they can be together in worship has been pretty significant for folks. I was very impressed with, I think it was Faith Cicero, though, how they're partnering with other groups in their community, particularly the American Legion, I think it was. So that the whole pandemic has really pushed them to partner with other people. So that I thought that was pretty cool.
That is awesome. Yeah, and building relationships, right, with the neighborhood around you. That's great. I wanted to share, and I stayed here in the main room with the folks at Holy Trinity in Skaneateles, and so impressed to hear about how for them Zoom worship isn't just about worship, but that fellowship opportunity. That when we're together, right, for those congregations that are face to face, you can't have that fellowship time because you need to be physically distant and all of those things. And I was sharing in my own congregation, I'm gonna miss when I don't get to have that check-in time with Irv as we're waiting for worship to begin. And so I think I'm gonna have a new person to sit with when I go back to church, because I've been able to build such deeper relationships with folks in that little in-between time, waiting for live streaming.
Yeah, you can talk to Irv when you're Zooming.
Yes, and he has figured out how to mute and unmute himself.
Yes.
Which is also pretty exciting.
Irv is 90, folks.
Yeah. And Pastor Susan Fortzig, were you?
Well, we talked about programs coming in, not at Luther Memorial, but Zion New Hartford has the YMCA every day and the Red Cross. Katie, what's the name of your church, Katie?
St. Peter's.
St. Peter's, that's right. They are doing more in their parking lot outreach. We've done food gathering, God's work our hands, but the things that I feel like, again, COVID is something that has forced us to adapt. So the fact that we do worship with a video, we worship in our parking lot, like it's definitely flexed some muscles, and that makes me hopeful that what's needed in the future, we know now that we can adapt. That's important. We decorated for worship, we decorated our front steps, like for every holiday that we couldn't celebrate in the ordinary way. So we had Pentecost balloons and Easter flowers, and there'll be something for the seasons coming. And that's like a new tradition. And it's I guess an artistic blessing and a sign of life on Main Street.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's awesome. Thanks for sharing, Pastor Susan. So
I'm going to speak for Trinity Herkimer as dean and just peripherally as their pastor. They received for them a very large bequest, and they sent about 10% of it into a partnership with an ecumenical group that's creating a warming center for the homeless people in the village of Herkimer. And it's powerful on so many levels. Their thought was it was a gift to us, we'll gift someone else. They saw this great need, and they had worked so hard, and they continue to work hard to develop strong ecumenical relationships that this thing is coming into being. And I'm very excited about it, even though none of the Trinity members will ever make use of this place. It is just a vision of their mission for Herkimer.
And I think that speaks to, right, the vitality that is in some of our smaller congregations. You don't have to have 350 people in worship to be a congregation that is full of vitality and life and sharing the life of Jesus. Yeah. Pastor Dick, were you trying to jump in?
Actually, I was talking to my wife, but I can share now. now that I've been outed. No, we have at Emmanuel, the biggest ministry that we had was our senior ministry. And with COVID, we pretty much had to put that on hold. So we've redirected and expanded our food pantry. It never closed during the course of the pandemic. And we found ways to expand it in that we started making deliveries to those people who either could not come to us or weren't comfortable coming to us. And we made it known, it was pretty much a word of mouth thing. And we made it known that we'll deliver to anybody, anywhere. And so we've just found new and creative ways to get the food from our food pantry into people's hands as needed.
That's awesome. Right. And I know that there are so many more things that are happening, right? Those backpack ministries that are happening that we talked about earlier with the report from Lutheran Charities. And I've heard word of lots of different things happening in your congregation, right? At St. Michael's and Camilla's, y'all did hot dogs in the kingdom in the midst of this, which is both feeding people, not only physically, but communally and spiritually, as you have that opportunity to be physically distanced to one another. And that's another legacy and life-giving thing from First English, right? That ministry continues in different ways. So I know that I think Pastor Wolling, we hoped that we would be done at 11:30.
Perhaps if you have one more breakout session question, and then we'll wrap it up after that.
Yeah, so I've got a breakout and then a couple of poll questions. So I'm going to send you back into breakout rooms, same folks you'll be with. And this time, just to ask the question outside of COVID, right? Because COVID is going to be everyone's answer to this question. So beyond that, whether you're thinking post-COVID or in other ways. So is there anything stopping you from doing more? What could be stopping you from doing more? Either those things that give you life and energy in supporting your neighborhood, or what's happening in your own community. So I am going to send you all back. So I will call you back probably in about 4 to 5 minutes. Right? This wasn't meant to like answer all the questions, but instead to get you thinking so that you could take these conversations back. So what were you talking about, David, with you and Pastor Susan that got you so engaged?
Again, it takes Pastor Susan and I, we each need 4 to 5 minutes just to start one thought. Nancy and Barb got stuck.
So Flo said it.
Well, but no, we started talking about the thing that often gets in people's way is not having a shared definition of success.
Ooh.
Because some people want to measure everything the church does by, did it mean more people came to worship? Or if it's not going to be measured by that, is it measured by the number of people we impacted? And I deal with this, for those of you, as a disclaimer, I happen to run a national nonprofit as well. So, this is a constant conversation. What is the definition of success? And that shocking realization that I had that Jesus had encounters with people all the time and never saw them again. And that God's definition of success is often at odds with our human tendency to want to measure success in numbers that we can physically see and touch and do. And we are regretfully have chosen either as a vocation or avocation or however we work, that we may never see the fruits of our labors. And that is the most frustrating thing when working in a church setting.
Yeah.
I'll leave the pulpit to those of you who do this full time.
David, that was such a gem, a shared definition of success. That was a gem. Thank you.
Yeah. That's the mic drop moment of the day. Yeah.
Yeah. I keep thinking though, we're always planting seeds, and that's sometimes more important.
Yeah, right. That's that parable of the sower, and just toss in the seed to see what happens. And we never know where it's going to land, even though that is not how any farmer plants.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Pastor Pete, did you want to, I was in your group and I thought you had a really powerful insight as well.
Yeah, our church, our building has been very busy for years. We have 7 or 8 12-step groups in the building every week. We have the Cortland Loaves and Fishes soup kitchen works out of our building. But what we came to see was, yeah, our building's busy, but we don't do that stuff. We just made space available. And so on days when Loaves and Fishes is down for a holiday or on a 2-week summer break that they do every year, our people formed a committee to feed our neighbors, and they work hard on that. We now have a team that has a Relay for Life team that raises a lot of money every year for cancer, but also interacts out in the community at Relay for Life fairs and things. And we're doing a lot more than we were before. And when I got there, we all thought we were doing a lot, but we realized, oh, we're not. The building's busy, but we are not. And so we've been working on that, and it's amazing what's happening.
Thank you. And thanks for the good conversation. So I want to wrap this up with just a couple of questions for you. And hopefully you remember that the image. So I've got a couple of poll questions for you. And so here's a question for you. Is where do you feel your congregation is in its life cycle? This is anonymous. This, right? Nobody knows your answer unless you're sitting with somebody else. So where do you think your congregation is? I'll give you a couple more moments. Almost everybody's answered.
Norma, I only answered for one of my churches. I couldn't answer both at the same time.
Totally fine. I assume that there are other people, right? Like, so some of you are answering twice for a congregation because there's more than one person here from some congregations. Yeah. So excellent. So thanks for answering. Oh, I'm sorry you can't. Oh, co-hosts can't see the poll. I just realized that. I ran into this before. I'll take away power from some of you. So this is what it says, right? Is that many of you feel you're in quadrant 3. I am not surprised that's the place, knowing so many of your congregations. And I'll tell you that this is this very similar thread to lots of congregations to all of our conferences, I should say, this kind of spread is that there are a couple that are in that high vitality, low sustainability place, some that are in that high vitality, increasing sustainability, but the majority of our congregations are in that quadrant 3 space. Yeah. And so if you are in that quadrant 3 space, please, and you need, if you want some support in having some conversation in your congregation, please reach out. We've got lots of different ways in which we can have those conversations. The same goes for all of you. We've got lots of different ways to help your congregation, from a one-shot workshop to get you rolling to a series of workshops. So now for our second question. So here's another question. And I just want to take away the power from Pastor Dana and Pastor Tara so that you can answer these questions. So in this next question, where do you think the Synod staff and other leadership should spend most of their time? Working with congregations in what quadrant? So this is where you think we should be spending most of our time. Okay. I'm watching the answers come back. I'm watching the answers come back. Yes, Kathy, I'm going to share the whole PowerPoint presentation with Pastor Wolling as soon as we're done here today so that she can send it out in the post assembly email. Yeah. So I'm going to end our polling now, and I'm going to share our results. You are pretty clear that we should be spending the majority of our time with those congregations that are ripe for conversation and ripe for redefinition, or even or another way of rethinking ministry. And some of you feel, right, most of our time spent in a couple of other places. And that's okay. Right? We all have our different perspectives. And I will tell you that Synod staff, we spend time in all of these quadrants. So final question for you is, where do you think we actually spend most of our time? Where do you think the Synod staff, the deans, Synod council, where do you actually think we spend the majority of our time? Yes, Pastor Allen, right? Redefinition, then redevelopment. You're absolutely right. That's part of the reason why that category of ministry program no longer exists in the ELCA, insofar as giving money to congregations to do that work. Yeah. So here we go. I think we've just about all answered. I'm going to share. My friends, you are spot on. This is almost exactly how we spend this time, with the exception of me, because I work with brand new congregations, right? So I also spend a good chunk of time in high vitality in those brand new congregations. So this is exactly it. And in fact, your answers to these questions, this is what started me on this path of this project and these conversations. Because we do spend a whole lot of time with those congregations that are near closing, and not with those congregations that are ripe for those conversations around redefinition, around thinking, what's next? How do we be faithful? How do we get there? And so I am so grateful for you answering. Now, all of this, we're going to take this together. I'm going back to the team of people I'm working with, and we're going to be hosting a series of conversations next month. The dates will be coming out soon. We're just trying to work out our calendars, that everybody in the Synod is going to be invited to participate. We're going to have a couple of different times so that we can hopefully get as many people as possible to participate, to continue this conversation. So to help us think through not only how do we get to what current reality is to where we want reality to be, but also to start helping us also think about how do we articulate what are the values of our whole Synod, because we want to be working out of that place of what we value as a Synod rather than what we've always done before. Right? Those are people say, whoever the people are, the 7 last words of a dying congregation.
We've never done it that way before.
We've never done it that way before. And we don't want to be that. We think that Jesus is doing a whole lot of really awesome things in our Synod and in your congregations, and we want to help capitalize on that and lean into that rather than, well, we never did it that way before, or this is the way we've always done things. So thank you for your time. Thanks for the last bit of time and conversation. This has been really awesome. And I will stop the recording and turn it back over to you, Pastor Wolling.